Hi everyone, welcome back to the Casual Watch Review channel. So in this week's episode, we'll be reviewing this great little vintage chronograph BWC Swiss watch. It was kindly lent in to me by a good friend to the channel, Joe, so a big thanks to Joe for lending me this watch. But before we get started with the review, let's just move some of this stuff out of the way. Let's move this camera out of the way. I guess you've got to ask if my camera's there, then what am I using to film with? So just a bit of fun there, sorry Watchfinder. Anyway, so here's this vintage BWC chronograph. Now I've got to be honest, before Joe had actually lent me this watch, I'd never heard of BWC Swiss before, but doing my research, it turns out that they were quite a significant Swiss watch brand at one time. Now the thing that immediately struck me about this watch when I saw it was, apart from this great blue panda dial, which we'll be talking about a bit later on, but its actual size. So believe it or not, this is actually 36 millimeters without the crown. We've got a 20 millimeter lug width, and then the lug to lug is 42. Now to put that into perspective, if I just show you my Speedmaster here, you could see the size difference straight away. So it's definitely got that vintage sizing to it. So what we're looking at here is the Panda Blue BWC Racing chronograph here. It's made of, this outer I think is a metal composite with a stainless steel back on it. So what we mean about a metal composite is usually some kind of base metal that's been chromed. It's using the Valjoux 7733 movement, which actually gives the chronograph a really satisfying click when you activate it. The same with the reset. So this is a totally manual wind chronograph, and you can actually feel the kind of spring in it as you're winding it. So here it is coming back to life. We've got the chronograph kicking off there. So when I stop the chronograph there, reset it, it's got that very satisfying snap. And this watch is actually in amazing condition. Joe said he got it actually new old stock, and I totally believe that. There's not a single scratch on it, a single mark on it. This crystal here is actually acrylic, and there's not a single scratch on it. Now, anybody that owns a watch with acrylic or Hesalite, like my Speedy here, knows that you only have to look at them and they scratch. So this is actually in fantastic condition here. The strap obviously isn't original to it, but it probably would have had a similar strap to this, or perhaps a metal strap. So one of my favourite parts of it is actually this dial. We've got the internal tachymeter on here with its yellow and then white markings around the outside. Again, this dial hasn't aged a day. It looks just as vivid as when it came out of the factory from the pictures that I've seen of the original released ones. We've got these really distinctive hands for the chronograph. So instead of them being like traditional hands, they're kind of like white with this blue line, which means that it's very precise for, you can read them very precise. And then we've got this other interesting gauge on the other side of the chronograph here on the right side. One of the other striking things about the dial is actually these applied markers here. And believe it or not, they have actually got lume on them, even though they look silver here. Now, I tried to get a good lume shot here, but unfortunately, it's not as generously applied as perhaps modern watches. But I'll throw up a picture here. I was actually struggling to focus it. It's got this very distinctive white second hand, which I just love. And then these straight hour and minute hands. It looks like a tool for telling the time, which, if you remember from my Omega Speedmaster videos, is exactly why I said I love the Speedmaster. They look like technical instruments for time measurement, and that's what really struck me about this watch. So one question I had was, who is BWC? They were actually quite a significant Swiss watch brand in their day. So BWC stands for Butty's Watch Company, which was founded in 1924 in Neuchâtel, Switzerland, by a gentleman called Alfred Charlet. So they mainly focused on producing pocket watches in the 1920s, and they mainly focused on the Germany, England, and Polish markets, and also Spain. Later on, they did expand overseas, and they had major markets in the US, Cuba, and Canada. Now, in the 1950s, throughout the 1970s, under the leadership of Charlet's son-in-law, Edwin Volkart, BWC was very successful. And then throughout the 1950s and 60s, BWC concentrated on producing high-grade mechanical watches, like the ones that you see here. They used a number of movements, but in particular, Valjoux. So this watch has the Valjoux 7733, which again is completely manual wind. And I found some later watches that were actually had the Valjoux 7750 in them. So unlike many of the brands that we've talked about on the show here, they actually were able to weather the quartz crisis of the 1970s. So BWC thrived because they basically embraced the quartz technology. So in 1967, they had electromechanical watches as part of their collection. And then by 1972, they already carried an entire collection of quartz digital display watches. And then in 1972, they had a fully developed quartz analog watch. This was at the time when the Swiss, despite being early pioneers in developing electrical watches, were really resistant to this new technology, and unfortunately they suffered because of it. So Universal Genève comes to mind, for example. So in 1991, all the commercial activities for BWC moved to Germany. Then in 1999, BWC Swiss was integrated with the newly founded Maddox company in Germany. And then in the early 2000s, they celebrated their 75th anniversary with a watch collection. Now, this watch collection actually won a Good Design Award for excellence in industrial design. So this is a US award, and it was presented to BWC Swiss in Chicago. Then in 2003, Stark Watches of Germany took over responsibility for BWC. And then they actually presented for the Basel World 2004 show. Now, one of the interesting things is I can't actually find any reference to the brand after 2015. So that was the last update of news on the BWC Swiss website. So I don't actually know if they're still around yet, still. I've found a few sites like Bonanza that look like they're selling modern versions of the BWC Swiss watches, and they seem to be very expensive. In fact, the price that they are would put them in a very competitive area with Hamilton, for example. So I couldn't actually find a reference whether they still actually are currently going. So if anybody knows, then definitely leave a comment in the comment section down below. So let's try it on the wrist so you guys can see what it looks like. Okay, so here's a quick wrist shot. So as we can see, it is a smaller size, certainly a smaller size than I'm used to, but once you wear it for a while, not only is it extremely comfortable, but it's actually a really nice size. With it being 42 millimeters from lug to lug, it definitely spans the wrist here. For reference, my wrist is about 7.5 inches. So I actually think that's quite a nice size. And typically, as I mentioned before, I would have been put off if I saw this watch and saw it was 36 millimeters in width, but it certainly changed my mind. So let's just do a quick comparison here between the Omega Speedmaster and then the BWC. So you can definitely see the size difference here, although they're about the same thickness. So a really nice little vintage racing watch. I've been very impressed with this over the last couple of days of kind of having it in my possession. I think my favourite has got to be this Panda dial, very distinctive. They had this dial actually in a number of other styles that they created as well. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this watch in the comment section down below. And if anybody else has any more information on it, I'd love to hear it. As always, guys, I appreciate any comments that you leave for me. I try and get back to them all as quick as possible. You can contact me on Instagram. You can contact me on thecasualwatchreviewer@gmail.com. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time on the Casual Watch Review channel. Thanks, guys. Bye.